and welcome to another episode of World of Africa. I'm Erik Njoka. On last week's episode, we told you about the growing support for Palestinians in Gaza and the continent following the retaliatory airstrikes by Israel. Well, the support has grown manifold and several other African countries have joined the rallying call. But there's a peculiar observation from demonstrations and demonstrators in Egypt. We'll tell you about that shortly. It's been more than 2 weeks since the war between Israel and Hamas began. And as the conflict rages on, so does protests across the globe. In Africa, though, the demonstrations have had a mixed bowl of support for Palestinians being bombarded by Israel, and some African leaders being accused of piggybacking on the demos for political gain. Case in point, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who is facing an election next year. Some critics argue that if the protests continue, they could turn out to be the second Arab Spring. Here's a report.
Protests in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza took place in several Muslim countries and beyond, with demonstrators calling for an end to Israel's blockade and airstrikes. Thousands of people rallied in North African countries. Throughout various capitals, Palestinian flags were flying alongside Algerian, Moroccan, Libyan and Tunisian flags, as demonstrators held marches broadcast on public and private television channels. But in Africa, it's not only the Muslim nations in the north that are rallying behind Palestine. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators, led by South Africa's ruling African National Congress, held protests at the Israel Embassy in the capital, Pretoria.
Free, free Palestine!
The ANC has expressed its solidarity with the Palestinian people, emphasizing their long relationship dating back to the days of the racial policy of apartheid implemented by the white minority government.
When you are oppressed, the only option you have is to fight. And that's what Hamas is doing. They are fighting for their freedom. Mandela did the same thing, took up the guns and fought for the freedom of the people of South Africa. When you are oppressed, you only have one option.
Hundreds in the Horn of African nation of Somalia joined many of their South and North African counterparts in their call to support the Palestinian cause.
We organized peaceful demonstrations supporting and reciting Quran and praying for our brothers in Palestine, in Gaza, that the whole world may be against what is going on in Gaza.
In Egypt, however, the protests had their twists and turns. Critics say President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's administration has been organizing staged protests to rally support for his embattled government by piggybacking on public sympathy for Palestinians as the death toll from Israel's war on the Gaza Strip keeps rising. The demonstrators ultimately started marching towards a symbolic place in the history of Egypt's protest movements, Tahrir Square. The 2011 Arab Spring protests converged there, culminating in the removal of then-President Hosni Mubarak. The protest coincided with Egypt holding a summit on the Gaza crisis, amid growing fears of a wider war in the Middle East. The Cairo Peace Summit brought together officials from Arab and European countries. But the fact that the US and Israel did not send top officials dampened expectations.
Egypt affirms and reiterates its complete rejection of the forced displacement of Palestinians and their exodus to the Egyptian territories in Sinai.
Despite the accumulated fury across the continent, most of the aid to Gaza is ironically from African nations like Egypt, Tunisia and Morocco. Trucks carrying aid have crossed from Egypt into war-torn Gaza since the disputed Rafah crossing was opened. More aid is expected to flow in as Israel intensified strikes on the Palestinian enclave in the war sparked by Hamas's bloody attack. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Let's head to West Africa now, where it is being reported that Niger's ousted President Mohamed Bazoum is being held in a secret location by the junta that seized power in the West African state. This is after Bazoum's attempt to escape failed. At the same time, withdrawal of French troops from the nation is nearly half complete. Here's a report.
Talk about bad luck. The Niger military junta is claiming that it prevented the escape of ousted President Mohamed Bazoum from captivity. The junta has been holding him in prison ever since its July 26 coup, ignoring international calls for his release.
This failed attempt would become a plan conceived as follows. Phase 1, escape to a first recovery point near the presidential palace to be reached by an unmarked vehicle. Phase 2, this vehicle would be driven to a plain in the Tchanjare district on the northern outskirts of the town of Niamey. Phase 3, from this plain, a move would be made to 2 helicopters belonging to a foreign power supposed to infiltrate them into Nigeria.
As punishment, Bazoum is now being held in a secret location by the junta that seized power in the West African state. Denying accusations that the president had tried to escape, his lawyers are now demanding that the junta show proof that the president and his wife and son were alive.
For the time being, the main perpetrators and some of their accomplices have been arrested. The public prosecutor has already opened an investigation. The situation is under control.
Niger's coup was one of the 5 that have swept West Africa's central Sahel region in 3 years, leaving a vast band of arid terrain south of the Sahara Desert under the control of military rulers. Like elected presidents in neighboring Mali and Burkina Faso, Bazoum was pushed out in part because of mounting insecurity caused by an Islamist insurgency that has killed thousands in the region and which the military said it would be able to contain better than a civilian government. Bazoum's party and family members say he has had no access to running water, electricity or fresh goods, prompting condemnation from the country's former Western allies. Meanwhile, following weeks of pressure from the military officers who seized power in July, France last September agreed to withdraw its troops based in Niger by the end of the year, marking a definitive breakdown in military ties with its former colony amid a wave of anti-French sentiment in the region. Pickup trucks and armored personnel carriers laden with French troops drove through the dusty outskirts of the capital Niamey on October 10th. Another French military convoy is scheduled to leave Niger for Chad by end of October, marking the halfway point of the promised withdrawal of the 1,450 French troops based in the West African nation. The commander of France's forces in the Sahel said that 1,500 French soldiers would leave Niger by December 31st, a time frame announced by French President Emmanuel Macron late last month.
We have 282 French soldiers who have left. There are major movements that are going to take place in the next few days, so in a week's time, we'll be almost half disengaged. But the big logistical flows will really start next week. Because obviously you can imagine that to get 1,500 people out, there are all the preparation operations. Setting up the containers and so on, there are 2,500 to get out roughly.
We're calling on the population precisely not to, behave. I wouldn't say irresponsibly, but to stir up hatred. Today we've worked together for years. We asked for them to leave, so we'd like everything to go very, very well, for them to be able to return to Chad.
The first French road convoy of troops withdrawing from Niger arrived in neighboring Chad's capital, N'Djamena, after 10 days on the road. From Chad, French troops can leave by air with their most sensitive equipment. However, most will have to be moved by land and sea. Bureau reports, WION, World is One.
Let's move to Central Africa. Paris willingly delivered its classified files to a commission of historians from both countries charged by President Paul Biya of Cameroon and French President Emmanuel Macron to unveil the gruesome yet often ignored part of colonization and decolonization process of the Central African country. As it would seem, colonial history remained a negligible component of French identity. This next report explains.
Comprising 15 historians, the team, directed by Karine Ramondi, will work on France's involvement in Cameroon in the repression of independence and opposition movements between 1945 and 1971. On July 26, 2022, in Yaoundé, Presidents Emmanuel Macron and Paul Biya expressed the wish that historians examine this bloody chapter in the history of France and Cameroon from 1945 to 1971, which has been virtually ignored by school textbooks and the general public. In March 2023, the heads of state pledged to declassify archives that had remained secret and launched the Franco-Cameroonian Commission.
The only thing that's going to come out of reparations, of course, is going to be up to the appropriate people to discuss and decide once that report is done. And you can obviously count on the team to make that report as balanced and as serious as possible.
The research report is due in December 2024. It is on the basis of this work that Paris and Yaoundé will be able, in the words of President Macron, to factually establish responsibilities for a subject that has been repressed in both France and Cameroon. The French president had promised that the result would be recognition of what happened, not repentance. Talks of reparations have been mentioned, but it is still too early to confirm.
It is precisely the mission of this commission and this report to give the president, we will say, a serious historical sum based on good number of files in order to determine what type of recognition and what gesture France wishes to make.
Among the omissions of French colonial historiography, the Cameroon War of the 1950s and 1960s is perhaps the most striking. Hardly anyone even realizes it took place. This secret war, which nonetheless claimed tens of thousands of victims, went almost unnoticed at the time, and its victors, the French, and their local intermediaries, methodically erased every remaining trace in the following decades. After independence was declared on January 1, 1960, an Orwellian silence descended on the state. French and Cameroonian authorities worked in tandem to enforce this vast enterprise of repression and concealment, successfully silencing even the most daring of the exiled oppositionists. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The East African nation of Kenya is ready to roll out the royal carpet in anticipation of King Charles and Queen Camilla's first African tour as a monarch. Buckingham Palace says the king will acknowledge painful aspects of the UK's relationship with Kenya during the state visit. The trip coincides with the country celebrating the 60th anniversary of its independence from Britain. Kenyans consider the Mau Mau rebellion to be one of the most significant steps towards the end of British rule in Kenya.
It was this announcement of Kenya's foreign ministry that broke the news of the visit of the new UK monarch to the East African nation.
Neil and myself are honored to bring to the attention of the country and the international community the forthcoming visit of His Majesty King Charles III and Her Majesty Queen Camilla to the Republic of Kenya. This will be His Majesty's first visit to a Commonwealth country since their inauguration.
The visit follows an invitation from the country's President William Ruto, whose country will celebrate the 60th anniversary of its independence from Britain on 12th of December. While King Charles is in Kenya, he plans to do some of the things he usually does on his trips at home or abroad. Check out local conservation efforts, meet young people and promote entrepreneurship. But Charles's visit to a Commonwealth country as a monarch will also, as Buckingham Palace said, acknowledge the more painful aspects of the UK and Kenya's shared history. That includes the violent and bloody Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s.
In doing so, Charles may send further signals about how the monarchy will try to answer critical questions it faces amid a broader reckoning in our world with history and the impacts of colonialism. The Mau Mau uprising is seen as a key turning point in Kenyan history and a significant step on the country's road to independence from British rule in 1963. The possibility that Charles may make a statement on the Mau Mau uprising may show other countries that the UK can address issues from its colonial past.
The visit will also acknowledge the painful aspects of the UK and Kenya's shared history, including the emergency between 1952 and 1960. His Majesty will take time during the visit to deepen his understanding of the wrongs suffered in this period by the people of Kenya.
But another problem awaits the king. Residents in central Kenya denounced a lack of compensation over a devastating 2021 fire that broke out during a British military exercise. The Kenyan court had ordered the British Army to pay compensation for the blaze, which ravaged more than 4,800 hectares, that is 12,000 acres of land, during a military exercise conducted by the British Army Training Unit in Kenya. The unit is based near the town of Nanyuki, some 200 kilometers, around 120 miles north of the capital, Nairobi.
You might be surprised to find out that his troops on the ground here continue to treat Kenya like a colonial outpost, where they can quite literally get away with murder and destruction. Our hope is that he will not have to visit again in a few years' time to make further apologies directly to us for modern-day crimes committed by his armed forces.
While Charles will be reflecting on that history, there is also the sense that the visit is in ways looking ahead and continuing a post-Brexit trend in British foreign policy that seemed to emerge with his recent visits to Germany and France. Beyond foreign policy implications, the visit could have personal resonance for Charles. He's been to Kenya 4 times. It is also the country where in 1952, his mother, then Princess Elizabeth, learned her father had died and she had become queen. The Mau Mau armed movement was fueled by the resentment some members of the Kikuyu tribe felt towards their British rulers and European settlers who farmed land in Kenya, as well as at a lack of political representation. The two countries have enjoyed a close relationship in recent years, despite the violent colonial legacy of the 1950s uprising, which led to a period known as the Emergency that ran from 1952 until 1960. The Kenya Human Rights Commission said 90,000 people were executed, tortured or maimed during the British administration's counter-insurgency operation. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Zero-emission cars are soaring in popularity, but running an electric vehicle is next to impossible in places with limited charging infrastructure. Stella Terra could change that. It is considered the world's first off-road solar-powered car that went for a test drive in the harsh Moroccan desert. Here's a report.
The 2-seater road-legal Stella Terra harnesses solar energy through rooftop panels. These give it energy self-sufficiency with a range of over 630 kilometers on a sunny day. With an off-road range of approximately 550 kilometers, this marvel was deployed to the desert for a road test covering a grueling 1,000 kilometers over Morocco's challenging terrains.
Stella Terra is the world's first off-road car powered on the energy of the sun, which makes it independent of charging stations, achieving completely freedom in a sustainable manner all around the world.
This is an invention by Solar Team Eindhoven, a group of students from the Technical University of Eindhoven. The team navigated through arid riverbeds, dense forests, steep mountain trails and loose desert sands to highlight the potential of robust, sustainable transport technology.
So, what have we been doing in Morocco? We tested Stella Terra extensively. We started in the north of Morocco and we drove over 1,000 kilometers through various landscapes to finish our journey in the Sahara, all powered by the sun.
The car contains a rechargeable lithium-ion battery, which would also allow it to operate in less sunny climates but over shorter distances. The car's bespoke converter for the solar panels was found to be 97% efficient in turning sunlight absorbed by their PV cells into electrical charge. The Stella Terra team is not for profit and had relied on sponsors for its budget.
We want to be 5 to 10 years ahead of the market. With Stella Terra, we want to demonstrate what's possible towards a sustainable future. We want to inspire companies, students, everyone.
The largest challenge for designers seeking to build solar-powered cars is the limited surface area on which to locate panels. The most efficient panels on the market generally reach about 45% efficiency, while most panels are about 15% to 20% efficient. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Mass weddings were held annually in Nigeria's northern states for many years until the previous administration discontinued the practice. The current governor had pledged to revive the ceremony, which was one of his key campaign promises. The Kano state government hosted a mass wedding joining 1,800 couples in matrimony, mainly widows and divorcees, selected from the 44 local government areas of the state. Here's a report.
Hundreds of couples said "I do," all at the same time, in Kano State in northern Nigeria this weekend. 1,800 couples exchanged their wedding vows at a ceremony under a mass wedding scheme for the underprivileged, sponsored by the local government. In a country facing harsh economic conditions, many lovebirds couldn't afford to organize the ceremony by themselves.
Life is really tough. This is why I could not get married, though I wanted to until this time. I pray my marriage becomes the key to my prosperity.
All 1,800 couples were received at the governor's residence and given gifts. A bride price is a tradition in some parts of Africa, where the groom pays an amount of money to the bride's family, an obstacle to marriage for some couples. In the conservative Muslim state, where cultural norms are strong, the bride's family provides furniture and kitchenware, while the groom provides accommodation, boxes of clothing, cosmetics, jewelry, footwear and handbags. Brides took part in a vocational training session before the wedding, where they were taught how to make household products as a source of income.
The wisdom behind teaching the brides some vocational skills is to make them self-reliant because life has become so expensive. But if a woman has a trade, she will be of help to herself, her husband and the society as a whole.
Mass weddings are often popular among women because they ban divorce without the wife's consent. Divorced women with children in the conservative society can face financial hardship and difficulty remarrying. Kano has the highest divorce rate in any Nigerian state, thought to be aggravated by the economic decline of the once thriving manufacturing region. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of Wild of Africa. Get in touch with us on all our social media platforms and share your feedback about the show there. My name is Erik Njoka. Keep watching WION World is One. Until next time, goodbye for now.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings